All right, so welcome. This is Introduction to Ethics. And the first thing we'll do every day, of course, is I'll take your attendance. And your attendance, along with your scores for all quizzes, the midterm, the final, your weighted total, that is your current actual grade, and everything else you'll need for this course, from external readings to my notes, okay, are found in Blackboard. Now, did you drop my course last time, or did you stayed the whole time? Okay, so you two know how this works, all right? But when you go to the Delgado Community College homepage, okay, you'll see that there's a text box there which has a number of links in it. For example, current students, faculty, email, Lola, and under Lola it says Blackboard. Okay? So Amber, you'll go to Blackboard. Once you follow that link, it should open a page that shows all your courses. When you click on Philosophy 175-1HA, which is our course designation, it'll take you to our home page. Okay? Now on the left-hand side of the page is a series of links. One of them says date of absence. So for the people that did not show up today, they will see today's date in that column. Okay? And this always confuses people for some reason, but if you were to see that, that means that I have you as being absent on 8/18. Okay? It doesn't mean you were absent 8 times out of 18 classes, which is what some people have thought about the various dates of their absence in the past, okay? You will also find a link that says readings, okay? And these are primary source readings in the history of ethical philosophy. Okay? Please come in. Are you Laura? Okay. What's your name? Borsky. All right, Kira. You are no longer absent. Excellent. Okay. So I was talking about our Blackboard page, okay? The first thing you want to do, and you want to do this right away, is read the course syllabus, okay? That's our contract. It is the policy for everything we'll do in here. It tells you what the course is intended to achieve, what we hope that you will achieve, okay, as learning outcomes. And it tells you everything about attendance and quizzes, exams, etc. Okay? After you look at the syllabus, you want to look at the course calendar. Okay? It appears right below the syllabus. The course calendar is your resource for knowing what we are doing on a daily basis. Okay? Every day of the semester is there. Days that we do not meet are not there. Okay? So each box is a class meeting. And it contains the reading assignment for that day. And so typically, I would encourage you to do the reading before the class during which we are to discuss that reading. Okay? But there are times when that will prove very difficult, okay? And I will alert you when those times are. And it is all right with me if you want to attend the lecture or watch the lecture, as the case may be, first, and then do the reading, because that might make it a little bit easier, you know? Having an understanding of what the philosopher is saying to us, what the basic insight is. makes your excursion into the details a bit easier. You always want to read the different moments of a text in terms of the fundamental, the essential question that is being addressed. Okay? And of course, this class, as an introduction to ethics, is guided by a single question. And that question is, what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to live a good life? And does that mean something different from the good life? Is the good life different than a good life? Typically, we might think so. Socrates would argue to the contrary, that if we really come to understand what it means to be a good person, you will discover that it is the very same thing as living a fulfilling, happy life. And that, as we all have, you encounter some experience which is tempting and yet contrary to what you think is appropriate, what you ought to do. In other words, something which you want to do but you shouldn't. Socrates would say, if you really understood what you are doing to yourself, then you would no longer desire this thing the way you once did. And of course, the ultimate hope as persons concerned with living in a way that is worthy of us, living a good life, isn't necessarily that we are going to discover the answer, or even that such an answer exists. It may turn out that there simply is no concrete answer to the question of what does it mean to live a good life. It may be that even if there is such an answer, we are not currently in a position to understand it. But at the very least, if we learn to subject our existing value system to critique, to open ourselves to the possibility that the way that we have always thought about things and lived our lives is not the only way, that there are alternatives open to us. Then I think we have made a great stride in answering the question that we began with. It may be that we will never become certain about whether we have done the right thing in a particular situation, or whether we have lived a good life in general. But if we simply learn the ability to take a step back from our comfort zone, from the familiar, comfortable interpretation of the world, of our lives, that we have employed thus far, and open ourselves to different ways of thinking and being. Perhaps that is itself the answer. Maybe the good life is simply living with the awareness that there are possibilities beyond the ones we have considered or selected. Okay? And that, I believe, is very close to what Socrates will teach us. Even though Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who are the three central ancient Greek figures in the history of philosophy, maintain that a good life is a virtuous life. That is, the ancient Greeks understood goodness to mean virtue, justice, temperance, courage, piety, and all the other virtues which arise from those cardinal ones. I do not believe that Socrates would ever say that he was certain that this is the best way to live or the only way to live, because he was acutely aware of human fallibility, that we are finite beings with finite minds, that there are some things which we simply cannot know. And amongst those things are the very desiderata, or the things that philosophers desire to know. Where the universe came from, whether there is a God, and the nature of that God, why I exist at all, and whether I have a purpose that is individual to me, something I'm supposed to do, whether human existence in general has a meaning, or whether it's just a fluke, an absurd moment in the history of the ongoing, changing universe. It may be that we cannot prove whether God exists or does not, whether I have a soul or do not, whether there is a good way of living as opposed to a bad way or not. But that's all right, because I will tell you right up front that I personally believe, and many philosophers would be harshly critical of me for using that sort of language, saying, I believe this. Because as philosophers, we are supposed to be, to some extent, objective, scientific. But if we're going to be honest, we do have beliefs. And it is impossible for any one of us to completely step outside of the shoes we have walked in. I can never change the fact that, for example, English is my native language. That I was born to this family of these parents with this body, with my talents and weaknesses. And so I'm not at all uncomfortable saying to you that I do believe that living a good life perhaps means nothing more than becoming aware of what it means to be free. After all, if ethics is the philosophical inquiry into what it means to live a good life, such that we can choose a path. We can make decisions whether to do or not to do something. About what the world means itself. About whether I have a purpose. This requires that I am free. If I'm not free to change and to bear the responsibility for the choices that I make, then ethics as a discipline is a fantasy. It doesn't make sense to ask what is a good life if I am incapable of change. But we are capable of change. And one thing I emphasize in my Introduction to Philosophy course, which is a broader course than this, because the history of philosophy is not strictly about the question pertaining to the good life. Philosophers also ask about the nature of reality and knowledge and beauty, truth. There are all kinds of truths, and the truth about what it means to be good is just one of them, or one question. But if it makes sense to say that we can inquire, ask questions about how I ought to live my life, this presupposes the freedom not only to raise the question, but then to do something differently as a result of the answer. Nor am I afraid to say to you that this course is not about imparting knowledge of the history of ethics. Of course we will do that. We will trace the unfolding historical conversation between very intelligent people about what it means to be a good person. We will learn what the Greeks thought it meant to be a good person, what the medieval thinkers thought, the modern thinkers, the postmodern thinkers. But while we are doing that, while we are considering the various moments in the history of ethics, from virtue ethics to natural law ethics, contractarian ethics to deontological ethics, care ethics, and then existential ethics, which are all different traditions that answer the question of the meaning of goodness differently. While we are learning these traditions, it's my hope that we are learning something more fundamental than what some group of thinkers had to say. What we need to learn from an ethical point of view is how it is possible to raise the question of what it means to be a good person honestly, without reservation, without fear. Because if I'm afraid of discovering that the way I have always thought about things and lived my life has perhaps done a disservice to myself, that perhaps I should have lived differently, made different choices, then I can't possibly change. So paramount in importance for me in guiding you through this course is that we have an encounter with our own freedom. That we ask without reserve, unabashedly, what does it really mean to be free and to be responsible for the choices that you make? And if we can even just answer that, if we can come to an awareness of how radically free each of us really is and what that means, then we have made a great stride toward what we really desire. And that is not just the knowledge of what it means to live a good life, but the good life itself. This course is about the quality of your life. I don't really care if 6 months after the end of the course you have forgotten everything that Kant or Plato, Aristotle, or Mill had to say. If what sticks is your awareness of the power of your freedom to change the quality of your life. We are going to consider different ways of thinking about what it means to be good. And when your thinking changes, everything changes. Because things don't mean anything in themselves. This thing has no meaning apart from a person using it, understanding that, hey, I can sit in this piece of furniture and take notes on it. It's a desk. But unless there were people, there would be no such thing as desks. Or anything else for that matter. Sure, there might still be a rock, which we happen to call the Earth, in orbit around this ongoing chemical reaction we call the sun, but it would be meaningless. The point is, as we're going to find Epictetus' teaching, we must be able to distinguish between the things that are in our control and things that are not within our control. But what is always in my control, my power, is the ability to change the way I think about what happens to me. Most of what happens to me is outside my control. I didn't ask to be born in the first place. I didn't choose my family. I didn't choose this body. I didn't elect what strengths and weaknesses I have. But I'm still responsible for all of it. And wrapping your mind around that is a challenge in itself. How on earth can I be responsible for something I didn't sign up for? Well, you are. We are thrown into this existence and completely responsible for the only judgment that really matters in the end, the judgment that you make about yourself. Because even if God exists, even if we assume that the Bible is more or less true, and I'm not doing that, but I'm just saying for the sake of argument, let's assume for a second that God exists, that He created the universe, and that the final judgment belongs to Him. Well, your intentions matter. Even the Catholic Church, which is among the strictest in its expectations, has come to affirm that there is room outside of following the doctrine of the church for salvation. Namely, if you have led your life with an earnest desire to know and do what is right, if you have sought to know God, even if you've never heard of Jesus Christ, if your heart is pure, then you can be saved by the grace of God. And that is Catholic doctrine since the Second Vatican Council. Okay? Now, of course, I want you to realize from the beginning that religion is only one way in which it is possible to ground an ethical worldview. It is a very prevalent one. I would say that even today, most people get their ethical bearings, how they think about right and wrong, in terms of their religion. But we will see that reason itself can be the ground for an ethical system. Or our feelings, or even something as flimsy as a contract. You'll see on the Blackboard page, somewhere in the left-hand column, there's a link called a cool video, okay? And that video is a lecture about, not by me, the possibility of morality without religion, in which we are shown animals, not just primates, but elephants, okay, acting in ways we would consider to be morally good. Demonstrating a sense of what is right in the absence of anything like a religion. What would be the motivation for an elephant to help another elephant find food, even if the first elephant wasn't going to receive any, apart from being a mother elephant with a calf, okay? But they do. It's very interesting. So perhaps there's something biological that can account for this sense we have that there is a difference between living a good life and a bad life.
Would you consider those senses like animalistic? Like, you know how in terms there's human instincts? Like,
We will find that basically any philosopher or tradition in philosophy has something to say about human nature, okay? And most philosophical traditions will describe human nature in terms of different parts. For example, mind and body, or reason versus passion, the rational element versus the animalistic element. Plato actually divides the person into three parts: reason, passion, and appetite. And typically, our instincts, like the instinct to preserve your own life, okay? Your instinct to eat when you're hungry, to sleep when you're tired, to fight or to flee from danger. Are generally equated with our feelings or inclinations, what we are inclined to do, okay? And that those inclinations, what I want to do, are sometimes at odds with what I ought to do. Yet at the same time, there are other traditions which argue that our feelings are themselves the guide to what we ought to do. While it is true that it is more prevalent that reason is ranked above our animalistic tendencies, okay? It isn't always that way. We will see when we consider utilitarianism, which is an ethical tradition that argues that to be good means to produce as much happiness as is possible for any being that can feel. And that utilitarian principle arises from the work of David Hume. And Hume argues that not reason, but your sentiments, your feelings, ought to be the guide to behavior. In fact, Hume will argue that reason can never tell us what we ought to do. It can only tell us what is the case. I ought to do what my sentiment tells me I ought to do, which, in the case of the utilitarians, is to make as many sentient beings happy as I can. But again, that is but one tradition in the history of ethics. Now, there is a textbook for this course, okay? It's called Ethics, the Basics. The author is John Mazzoni. And this is about $20, $22, something like that. Okay?
Who's the author again?
John Mazzoni. It's at the bookstore, okay? Or you can probably get it from the Chimes bookstore across City Park Avenue, or from any online vendor, Amazon.com.
The Chimes bookstore is closed.
Oh, they closed down. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, I went like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
They relocated, I think, somewhere else.
So, this is an inexpensive book, and that's part of the reason that we chose it. Okay? But what Mazzoni does is to break the ethical question of what it means to be good into 4 parts, such that he argues that any tradition in ethics ought to give an answer to the following 4 questions. What is human nature? What are we really like? Are we essentially selfish beings? Are we essentially benevolent? You know, do I have an instinct toward the well-being of others? Am I essentially a rational being? Okay. So what is human nature? Because after all, as we'll find Socrates teaching us, I can't know what it means to be a good thing unless I know what the thing is supposed to be in the first place. I can tell you what it means to be a good piece of chalk because I know what the chalk is supposed to do. We created it for the purpose of writing on the board. And if it does, then it's a good piece of chalk. But if I carry that reasoning over to the human being and say, well, if you want to know what it means to be a good person, you must first answer the question of what it is to be a person in the first place. The answer is evasive, much more elusive. Who can answer for me what it means to be a person?
Breathing.
That's part of it.
All I can think of.
Well, but that doesn't separate us from any other living being, does it?
Would you also have to consider the individual themselves? Like, what does it mean to be, what am I supposed to be?
Absolutely. You know, there are two separate questions there. There is the question about whether or not humanity has a purpose, whether there is some sort of grand meaning for the fact that human beings exist. But then there is the more personal question of whether I myself have a distinct purpose for which I was born. Okay? Two different questions. And the point of this class is not so much to answer them as to learn how to raise them. As you'll see in the syllabus, what I see as my job in this class is to show you not only that, but how it is possible to make the question of what it means to live a good life legitimate, a topic for rational investigation, that it can be raised from a rational point of view. And the possibility that what it is to be good is not just a matter of opinion, but that is itself something we must consider. Is there an answer? Is there an answer to what it means to be good in the case of a person? Well, certainly, the major 5 ethical traditions that we will consider, 5 or 6, all presuppose or assume that there is an answer. Okay? Whether being a good person means creating happiness, or doing your duty, or being virtuous, or caring for others, or pursuing your self-interest, all different answers to that question. But what they share in common is the view that there is an answer, and the answer applies to every one of us. But as we approach the end of the semester and begin to consider existential ways of thinking, we will entertain the question of whether there can be something like an objective answer to the question of being good. Maybe there is no single answer to it. Maybe living a good life means nothing more than learning what it means to take responsibility for your choices. Now, along with the question of what it means to be human nature, therefore, is the question of whether goodness is relative. Is the answer to the question of what it means to be a good person relative either to the culture to which you belong, or perhaps even relative to individuals? Is what is good for me not necessarily good for you? Or is there a single answer that applies to everyone? That's the question of relativism. Now, if I say something like, to be a good person means to be virtuous, you can certainly, and would be within your rights to ask me, who said so? How do I know? Where's your evidence that goodness means virtue? Or to put it differently, what is the origin of ethics? Where does goodness originate? If I say that to be good means to make people happy, well, where is that written? Where's my proof? That's the question of the origin of ethics. Where do ethical standards come from? And what is their authority? And then finally, there is the practical question. Those other three were really theoretical. The question of human nature, the question of relativism, and the question of the origin of ethics. But the fourth question is the practical question of what makes something right or wrong? What makes my action right? What makes my action wrong? What is the standard by which we make that judgment? Okay? And of course, I can't answer that question in isolation from the other three. If I'm going to discover what I have to do in order to live a good life, what makes my actions right or wrong, then I will already have had to say something about what we are, human nature, something about whether that value judgment is universal, applying to everyone, or relative to a certain group, or even an individual person. And I'll have to tell you where that value judgment originates. Is it the will of God? Is it the consensus of a culture? Is it something that arises from human feelings? Or is it part of our biology? And so that's the way that Mazzoni frames the tradition of ethics in terms of those four parts, okay? So what we will do is move in historical order from the ancient Greek conception of goodness through a medieval conception, a Stoic conception, into what we call the modern era, which is the 17th century, and then the postmodern, the 20th century. 21st century thinking would be called contemporary ethics, what's going on right now. But after we have considered the history, then I want to look at the possibility that what it means to live a good life is a matter of your decision. Because what it means to be a person is a matter of decision making. The idea that we not only choose what to do, but that we choose what we are, is existentialism. And that will bring us very close to what my personal hope for the course is. That we have an encounter with our own freedom. And catch even a glimpse of the enormous implications of being a free being are. Okay. Now I've said enough about what we're going to do in here. Okay, I want to now return for a moment to how we're going to do it. In other words, the Blackboard site. Okay. Remember that this is a hybrid, which means we meet once a week on Monday, and then the other meeting is virtual. You will watch a class session that I have recorded in the past, okay? Now, just so you know, I have recordings of all the lectures, okay? So if you were to miss a class, you can go to YouTube, just type in my name and go to my channel and find the lecture. You can even do that to, watch the discussion that a different classroom had about the same thing we discussed face to face, okay? It is cool. It is cool, man. I get emails from people all over the world who have watched these things.
So you record every class that you have?
No,
Even right now?
not every single class session, but every topic that I have lectured on or had a class discussion about. For the most part, I have a recording of. Okay? There's something like 40 videos in the YouTube channel. Okay? But they're never the same. All right? Because I don't follow a script. You'll find on the Blackboard page that there is also a menu called Lecture Notes. Okay? And you two are already familiar with this. But these are basically files that are bullet points, okay, where I have extracted the most important elements for you to focus your studying around, okay? The lecture notes are basically what I would use if I needed an outline to follow in giving it or guiding a discussion, okay? So when you're doing your reading, you ought to have those lecture notes open, okay, so you know what to focus on. And use it as the basis for your own further note-taking, okay? Now the book takes us through the basic traditions in the history of ethics in the Western world. The other readings are also out of or come out of the traditions we find in the book, but they are primary sources. In other words, there are moments, and one of them is immediate, where we will read a work in the tradition itself. We will read Plato. We're going to read Plato's Apology. Even though we've done this in my intro course, we consider it from a slightly different perspective in here. Okay? We will read Kant's ethical writing. We will read some existential works. Okay? Because I think that exposure to the primary sources, in other words, getting it from the horse's mouth directly as opposed to what Mazzoni thinks that Plato is saying, to allow you to read Plato yourself and make your own assessment, is an important part of doing philosophy. So, the Blackboard page is where you find the syllabus. Read the syllabus. That's where you learn about, absence, policy, and about grading and everything else. I can tell you that your grade in here is made up of 10 quizzes, a midterm, and a final exam, all of which are multiple choice, all of which you will take online, okay, either from your home or anywhere you can get an internet signal, okay, and it's very easy to do. You will receive an email saying that quiz 1 is available, okay? I usually give you 48 hours, sometimes a little longer, some window within which you ought to take the quiz. And you just click on quiz number 1, it opens up, it gives you the instructions, and then you click on begin, and you'll be asked a question, and there'll be 4 answer selections. It is timed. Each 10 question quiz should be done within 25 minutes. Okay? Now, when I give class, when I used to do these things in the classroom on Scantrons, I would give the class 15 minutes, and that was more than enough time for most people to finish. So 25 minutes is more than enough, okay? Plus, you can use whatever materials you want. You can use the lecture notes while you're taking the quiz. Okay? Now, the fact that I let you do this ought to tell you that you can't just wait until the quiz comes and think you're going to be able to find the answers at the last minute. Okay? You've got to have a basic understanding of what we have talked about. You can verify things quickly, but you've got to basically have your mind wrapped around the material.
You said it's timed. Let's say if I'm in one location and either the internet goes down or whatever and I started it already, could I pick it back up?
No. Here's what happens. And it does happen often that you get kicked offline for some reason, you lose your internet signal, right? All you have to do is send me an email and I will reset it for you, okay? And you can take it again, okay? And the reason that that's not a problem, right? It's like, of course, if I reset it for you and you take it again, you're thinking, well, wait a minute, I already know what 4 or 5 of these questions are. I can go, I can look up the answers. The quiz that you take is an individual quiz, okay? The questions you answer are randomly selected from a bigger pool of questions that I've created. And Blackboard randomly selects them. You're answering the same stuff, okay? But through different questions. Not only does it randomly select the questions, it rearranges the order of the questions and the answers, okay? So nobody ever takes exactly the same quiz as another student. Okay, so it's, you can't cheat. Not that you would want to. Most people, I've caught people looking at, the Scantron on the person sitting next to them. What they don't know, and I do, is that this person's failed every quiz so far. So you want to do this on your own, man. You can miss 3 classes without telling me anything, without penalty, okay? But don't do that. If you're not here, either tell me before, if you know you're not going to be here, or tell me afterwards, I was sick. In other words, tell me something. Give me something to work with so I can excuse your absence. Now, there's a limit to how many times I'll do this, okay? But, if you had an emergency, we are a non-traditional student body. Most of us have jobs, even children, and sometimes you get called away, okay? That's cool. I'll just excuse your absence, So, as I'm sure is going to happen, the 2 people or so who are absent today are going to say, hey, sorry, I missed the first class. Here's what happened. I'm still going to record the absence by its date, but I put a little E next to it, which indicates that I've excused it, which basically means you don't really have that absence. But of course, the reason I record it is because if you have 10 of these things, that's not going to fly either, okay? You basically want to avoid accumulating 4 unexcused absences, because then you're in danger of being dropped, okay? But we only meet once a week, for God's sake. Okay, so I do recommend that you are here. But again, if you're not, you can still view a classroom discussion or lecture about what we did simply by going to my Blackboard page. Okay. In fact, I may just, I may just post all the lectures on Blackboard, but you can go directly to YouTube and watch them just by finding them on my channel. Okay, now let me just verify for a moment what it is that I have scheduled. After you read the syllabus, check the calendar, okay? You've printed it out already? See, that's our calendar. What do I have for next class?
Quiz number 1 due 11:59 p.m. Socrates and Universalism.
That can't be next time.
9. Oh, sorry.
It goes down.
Reading Plato's Apology.
Okay. So yeah, you'll see the dates go downward, okay? Your first reading assignment, and that means you have to get it done sometime this week, okay, is Plato's Apology, which is the story of Socrates' trial. He was brought up on capital charges. He was found guilty, and he was executed. And of course, it makes sense from a chronological point of view, a historical point of view, to begin with Socrates, because he was the first philosopher to make the question of what it means to live a good life systematic, a topic for rational investigation. But he also teaches us the spirit with which we raise these kinds of questions. Okay? And that's something I want you never to forget as we make our way through the history of ethics. I want you to remember why we're doing this. It is not so that you possess the knowledge of what Immanuel Kant said goodness means. It is so that you learn your own power to change and to make your life anything you want it to be. Okay? The reason we ask about the good life is so we can live one, not just know about it. If I know something or believe something about living a good life, but I don't act on it, then in fact my life gets worse. All right. Now, if you have any questions or difficulties with Blackboard or anything else, just email me, okay? Yes.
On today's it says reading the zoning text.
Okay. Yes. I wrote something like the introduction, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All he does in the introduction here is talk about ethics in general and break it down into those four aspects that I told you about. The question of human nature, the question of the origin of ethics, the question of whether ethics is relative, and the question of what actually makes something right or wrong. The practical question, okay? So yeah. Look, I think you should get the book, but of course I have no control over whether you do get the book. You can certainly get by without it, all right? But it is helpful to have a very plain explanation of the various traditions under consideration, okay? And, you know, relative to some of the other books that you might have to buy, like math books or biology books that can cost, you know, $70, $100 or more, $20 is not too bad, okay? Okay, does anybody have any questions? See, you know, because you were reading horizontally instead of vertically, you realize that our first quiz is not for another 3 class periods, okay? So it's like a week and a half or 2 weeks from now. Okay? Well, what's the date of the first quiz?
Not, September 3rd.
September 3rd, okay? Which means I'll make it available to you like on the 1st, and you'll have those 2 days to take the quiz whenever you want, as long as you submit it by 11:59 p.m. on the 3rd. Okay? Cool? All right. Well, I won't see you face to face for a whole week, but email me if you have any difficulties. Okay?
But like and subscribe.
In fact, I guess you're going to be watching the discussion of the apology online. Okay? But of course, when we get back together next Monday, we can always talk about it, you know. All right. I'll see you all then.